It's not really the case now, but the whole selling point of Call of Duty back in the day was how different it was from other historical shooters of the time. We've all heard it, I think. While stuff like Medal of Honor or even other shooters like Halo focused on small scope operations led by individual war heroes, Call of Duty went for an immersive experience where you were just one more rifle in the war machine.
Third squad, draw their fire from the left. Second squad, hit them from the right. Go, go, go!
The original 2003 game aimed to recreate large-scale battlefields filled with soldiers to fight alongside you, and with this came a lot of technical marvels, like the sheer number of named NPCs in the game, very impressive for the time, or the utterly huge and chaotic fights you could get into. And I think this is a more honest approach than those that came before. World War II adaptations, be them movies or video games, generally tend to focus on one of two aspects, often a mix of both: the terror of war and the bravery of war. All the suffering that this conflict entailed, and paradoxically, the unforgettable heroism of those who sacrificed themselves to stop fascism. Of course, video games need to be fun, so they generally focus on the latter. The idea that you're putting your neck on the line for the greater good is a very powerful motivator for a guy with a gun, and it translates very well into video games. When you're playing a World War II shooter, the developers normally want you to feel good, like you're doing something heroic and worthwhile. That's what they appeal to. And that's a common thing in all shooters, even before Call of Duty. What Call of Duty did different then was the collectivization of bravery. Now that's something that's greatly facilitated by the setting. World War II is a very special conflict in the sense that it's one of the most black and white conflicts we have in recent memory. It's morally trickier to glorify World War I, for example, because that war was fought between a gang of colonial empires. All of them were assholes. That doesn't mean you can't put a spotlight on the personal bravery of the soldiers who fought in it, but it's really impossible to argue that World War I was a good war or that it served any greater purpose. World War II, on the other hand, was also fought between a bunch of colonizer assholes, but one side was much bigger assholes than the other. The Nazis, the Italian fascists, the Japanese xenophobes, the Allies weren't saints by any measure, but to anyone who examines World War II, it's immediately clear who the villains were. Unless you're, a neo-Nazi or something. And what that means is, World War II can be glorified because amongst its many purposes, one of them was stopping genocide. This is what allows the soldiers of the Allied countries in the war to be universally portrayed as the good guys. Sure, they killed a lot of people, even innocents along the way, but it was a necessary war. There wasn't any way to not go to war with Germany. In the original Call of Duty, I think this glorification of the war is in full force, but like I said, unlike other World War II shooters, it chooses to deify not the individual soldier, but the platoons and battalions, and so the war effort as a whole, but in a way that still feels grounded in the actual people. I've been saying a lot of fancy words, but if you are paying attention, and if you know anything about Call of Duty nowadays, you're probably thinking, that doesn't apply to all the games, does it? The Call of Duty franchise changes considerably as the years goes on, not just in, graphics and game design, but also themes and ideology. I'm not going to discuss that in this video. This is about Call of Duty 1 and its expansion, because I think, despite slip-ups and stumbles, this game more or less sticks to a sort of founding philosophy, to show war not through a single hero, but through 100 soldiers. My goal here is to examine how this was narratively constructed and how it interacts with the historical reality of World War II. This is not a critique of Call of Duty's historical accuracy, which has already been done before, but rather an analysis of how it uses history to form its narrative. The original Call of Duty has 3 different campaigns, a tradition that would carry on through much of the series. These campaigns take you through different fronts, events, and points of view of the war, and though you play them in a certain order, it doesn't reflect the actual chronology. Unsurprisingly, the first one is the American campaign.
Martin, good to see you. They got your story about here too, huh? Hey, good luck.
The American campaign focuses on D-Day in 1944, which makes sense. This was the big point of entry for the United States in the European theater, and it's been intensely mythologized as a huge turning point in history. we take control of Private Martin, a faceless conscript, as most of these early protagonists are. The first mission sees him walk through an obstacle course in what doubles as a tutorial. We learn to walk, crouch, jump, climb, and find our way around US staples such as the M1 carbine, the Thompson, the Springfield sniper rifle, grenades, and fucking bombs. This is all taking place in Camp Toccoa, Georgia, 1942. Toccoa was not made up, it actually existed, and it trained the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, which Private Martin is assigned to. So the character we play as is fictional and blank, an empty vessel for the player, who can be representative of any of the many thousands of soldiers who partook in the war. But the regiment he's fighting with, and the events he'll be involved in, were very much real. It's through this technique that Infinity Ward puts you in the war. You're just one more cog in the huge machine that is the 506th, but that doesn't mean you're not important. The first part of the American campaign proper takes place on D-Day, June 6th, 1944. The whole of Operation Overlord is introduced via cutscene in this diegetic slideshow by Captain Foley. You're probably familiar with it. It was a huge airborne and amphibious assault designed to liberate France, starting from Normandy. Our guy, Private Martin, as part of the elite 101st, will play the role of a pathfinder. We land with a parachute a little before midnight, and our goal is planting a beacon to signal the start of the airborne invasion. From here, we're supposed to take over the town of Saint-Mère-Église and use it to strangle Route N13, which the Germans could use to lead a counterattack against the beach landings in the morning. And this, again, actually happened. This small French commune was one of the first to be liberated on D-Day by the 101, and it was held by it for that very purpose. The 1962 movie The Longest Day has a section dedicated to it, especially including John Steele, a private who got his parachute stuck on a church on the way down. The parachute landings were very messy, so much so that the Germans were confused and thought this attack was just a distraction from the real thing. Saint-Mère-Église still has a monument dedicated to John Steele, and you can see a tribute to him in-game. There's also this other Pathfinder who died on the way down. Rest in peace. Speaking of inspirations though, the American campaign is also very inspired by Band of Brothers, a 2001 series focusing on the 506th Regiment. Camp Toccoa is actually included in that, which is likely why it ended up in the game. Call of Duty, especially early Call of Duty, tends to really wear its influences on its sleeve. When the rest of the squad drops in from the skies, we follow our allies under machine gun fire, break into the town, and sweep it clean while detonating artillery cannons. The next mission begins hours later, past sunrise, amidst the German counterattack. Like I said, holding the town, not just conquering it, is what's important. This mission ups the difficulty a bit with a lot of spawning enemies, and your first tanks, which must be destroyed with German Panzerfausts stocked up in the town's church. The very same one Private Steele dropped on, by the way. We're later led into an open area though, where a scoped rifle comes in real handy, and scout out a Peugeot in a loco estate. From here, Captain Foley personally tasks us with speeding through Route N13 to deliver a message to command and ask for reinforcements. This mission, as far as I know, is fictionalized, though it is true that reinforcements arrived in Saint-Mère-Église the following day, this being tanks from Utah Beach, and completely expelled the German attackers. In the Call of Duty universe, we're the ones responsible for calling those reinforcements, which is a liberty I can accept. Now already, we can see many of the characteristics of Call of Duty's thematic design, which I mentioned before. Throughout all of these early missions happening in a very grounded historical setting, we fight and die along our fellow soldiers. Names such as Captain Foley, Sergeant Moody, and Private Elder follow us along our whole journey, and while the other NPCs tend to have randomly generated names, they still accompany our movements through the countryside. In Call of Duty, it's very rare for the player to be alone. Even when the NPCs aren't very useful because of shitty AI, they're always there, drawing fire from the enemy, serving as a reminder that you're part of something greater. Something I think contributes to this feeling of camaraderie with your virtual colleagues is the difficulty. Call of Duty 1 is a difficult game, mostly because, unlike the future games of the series, it lacks automatic healing. To regain your health in Call of Duty 1, you need to find medikits. On higher difficulties, it can be a pain to deal with that when you lose half your health bar to a single shot. And on Veteran, the highest difficulty, there are no medikits. So once you lose some health, it's gone for the level. Couple that with the fact that checkpoints straight up do not trigger if your health is too low, and yeah, playing this game on Hardened, but especially on Veteran, is really damn tough. I have beaten it on Veteran before, but it took a long while. Some missions I would spend a whole day on to get them done. For this playthrough, I chose Hardened instead, which is still challenging, but at least it didn't take me forever to record. Anyways, my point was, I like that the game is hard. If you're playing on Hardened and beyond, you need to be really attentive to your surroundings and use your allies to bait out enemy fire and figure out where to go. Even if the NPCs don't do much, they become a vital part of the game because you need to use everything it gives you if you want to beat its tricks. This greatly contributes to the feeling that your team, not just you, but your whole team, actually matter. Brickwork Manor is the final mission during D-Day. It happens less than an hour after the last one and is also based on a real event, this being the Brickwork Manor assault in which the 506th participated. This was a battle fought and won by 23 paratroopers against 60 well-equipped German combatants in defensive positions. It's a miracle they pulled it off. And we get to pull it off too, blasting artillery guns and saving lives. This is the first mission that gives you a Garand, by the way, which is always cool to use. Brickwork Manor also appears in Band of Brothers. From here on out, the game gets a little more creative. So after D-Day, Baker Company, which is our company, gets officially recognized by the brass and detached from the 506th for special operations behind enemy lines. So we kind of become a Spec Ops force all of a sudden. And 1 month later, we're tasked with covertly invading a chateau in Bavaria to rescue 2 British POWs. Okay, this doesn't have historical parallels, of course. It's action movie stuff they included to make the game more varied. And I do like the stage. It's a nice change of pace, being inside a Nazi mansion with a BAR, but this does hurt the game's themes a little. You're still accompanied by soldiers in this mission. Moody and Folly come along, but you're no longer just a soldier on the battlefield. Now you're an epic Spec Ops guy and spend most of the level alone in the corridors. At the end of the stage, we rescue Captain Price, not to be confused with the other Captain Price or the other Captain Price, and though the second guy we were looking for is not there, Price knows the location. The final mission then, in the American campaign, is another month later and sees us invading a fictional prison camp in Austria to find Major Ingram. Similar shtick. Made up scenario, special operation, you're the only guys who can do it, blah blah blah. Though, strangely enough, Major Ingram is the only prisoner in the prison camp. The rest is all soldiers. Why would they have a prison camp for one guy? Whatever. I don't think these missions ruin Call of Duty's themes of camaraderie and courage or anything. They're both fun, especially the second one with a time limit. But I think they showed the first cracks in the original foundation. Like, yeah, World War II is cool and all, but wouldn't it be cooler if we could make our own story with these crazy action movie missions? Let's look at another example.
Sergeant Evans, glad you're still with us. We're in luck.
The British campaign starts right after Major Ingram is saved, though it rewinds us back to D-Day. This time we're Sergeant Evans of the 6th Airborne Division of the British Royal Air Force. We also get a slideshow for this, and our objective is to land via glider in Normandy and hold a bridge in a town called Benneville to block German crossings over the Orne River. This did happen as well. Said bridge is now known as the Pegasus Bridge in France, in honor of the symbol of the airborne forces. We have a rough landing, which somehow does not alert the Germans, and then we fight along Captain Price to take them out. Yeah, the same Price we saved in the American campaign. This was before he got captured. I don't know why, but I don't like the British guns all that much. The Enfield doesn't feel that good to use. Maybe it's the sights. And the brand doesn't feel powerful enough for some reason. Then the Sten, which is introduced later, feels like it covers too much of the screen for my liking. But they're enough for the mission. It's really just killing every guy. This is one of the quickest and most successful operations of D-Day, so it makes sense that it's easy in-game. Though much like in the American counterpart, we have to stay here till the morning, and it does get harder then. We're forced to hold the bridge against snotting hordes, and we have to use a flak gun to take out tanks. And it gets tricky to juggle those two things without getting shot. The checkpoints are also not that friendly, and if you die, you might go quite a bit back on the timer. When it does run out though, the reinforcements arrive, and then the campaign shakes it up again. After this event, Evans and Price are transferred to the SAS, the Special Air Service, for secret operations behind enemy lines. So this is a lot like the American campaign, though here it happens even earlier. We leave the historical front lines of the war to go on fictionalized James Bond type missions. Our first mission in the SAS is to invade and bomb the Yadder Dam inside Germany. This is in September. And the second is to infiltrate battleship Tirpitz off the coast of Norway in late October. Both of these are kind of insane. In the Yadder Dam, we go through it alone. Price only meets up with us in the getaway vehicle at the end. So somehow, Sergeant Evans, a single soldier, raided the place, killed the whole ass dam of German guards, exploded anti-aircraft guns, planted bombs at the main powerhouse of the dam, and got away with it. Then we have a whole truck chase sequence, which is pretty cool, and we steal a plane in the airfield nearby. But this is totally crazy. The battleship is similar. Evans and Price infiltrate under German disguises, and then steal weapons from the armory to sweep through the entire ship. And Price fucking dies in this, by the way. Like, we don't see him die, but he just disappears after the start of the mission, and we're meant to assume he was killed in the firefight. So Evans takes pretty much the whole ship on his own, plants the bombs, destroys radios, and steals documents, and gets out of there alive. Neither of these missions happened, logically. The Yadder Dam does exist, and it was bombed in 1943 by the British in Operation Chastise, then later rebuilt. The game acknowledges this much, but it was not invaded in 1944 like the game depicts. Battleship Tirpitz also existed and was bombed in mid-November, but it was not infiltrated by the SAS a month before. In the game, we're meant to be preparing the battleship for the eventual bombing, like in case the bombing doesn't work, I guess. But that doesn't make any sense, because we kill every single guy on that ship. How is it still sailing half a month later? These missions are fun. Hard, but fun. Yet, again, they divert from what the central philosophy of Call of Duty 1 was marketed to be. Through most of them, you're alone. It's just you and a billion enemies, which is exactly what makes them difficult. Thematically, I don't enjoy these missions as much because they do this. They don't feel like they're part of World War II, they break away from it for the sake of gameplay. This trend of making the British soldiers overly competent spec ops operators who do crazy, unbelievable manly shit in the shadows will carry on through Infinity Ward's games and become a central thing in the Modern Warfare trilogy, especially. Here, I don't think it's too bad, but it does make the British campaign my least favorite. So let's go on to my favorite.
For Mother Russia, comrades! Do not turn your back on her! Victory or death!
The Soviet front of World War II is, to me, the most interesting and important part of it. Don't get me wrong, D-Day was important, of course. All the soldiers that died on the Western Front, or in Africa, or in the Pacific, are heroes who valiantly fought fascism. But the Eastern Front was different. When the Soviet Union was invaded in 1941, forcibly entering a war it did not want, it saw itself threatened by an existential menace. As a communist regime, the Soviet Union was ideologically at odds with Nazi Germany. It was also a country of Slavic majority, an ethnicity deemed inferior by Nazi ideologues. So picture it this way: if the United States had lost the war, not much would have happened, at least not immediately. They were never even invaded during it. If the United Kingdom had lost the war, it might have been occupied, and its government might have been toppled in favor of a collaborationist regime, like what happened in France, but it wouldn't have ceased to exist. Now, the Soviet Union was under very real threat of ceasing to exist if it lost. And we're not just talking about the government or the Communist Party, but the Soviet people as a whole. Around many Soviet areas, Nazi policy was extermination. They would stomp through small villages and kill everyone in sight just because they were Slavs, somehow inferior to the Aryans. Nazi Germany's plot in Western Europe was to overthrow, but Nazi Germany's plot in Eastern Europe was to colonize and exterminate. The Soviet Union had nearly 20 million civilian casualties by the end of the war. Operation Barbarossa, as the Nazis called the invasion, was an explicitly murderous colonial project. I'm saying all of this because it means the Soviet war was something else. It wasn't just the soldiers who fought and died, it was the people. They had to because otherwise they would have been wiped out entirely. Couple this situation with the revolutionary collectivist ideals of the Soviet government, and you have an environment very appropriate for the idea of collective bravery. The Soviet people lost 27 million in World War II and were responsible for 80% of German casualties in the entire war. They were instrumental in pushing back the Reich, likely more so than D-Day, and they paid a huge price for it. This is why the Soviets called World War II the Great Patriotic War, because quite literally, the country and its people might have disappeared if they had lost. If there's one country in World War II where it makes the most sense to exacerbate collective bravery, not just of the army, but of society as a whole, it's this one. Or maybe Poland or other Eastern European countries, but they don't show up in this game, or really many games at all. The Soviet War was very long with a bunch of interesting conflicts, but this game focuses on the biggest, the Battle of Stalingrad. This was a major pivotal point in the war. The capture of Stalingrad would have given Germany access to the Volga River, which the Soviets were using to transport supplies. Yet despite Germany's stroke of luck in the invasion so far, this time it did not hold out. In 1942, its assault was halted, and it was subsequently pushed back all the way to 1945 when the Soviets reached Berlin. I've seen people call it the moment in which the Germans lost the war, because after Stalingrad, they never managed to push back. We start in September 1942 though, in a much less hopeful present, as a conscript named Corporal Alexei Ivanovich Voronin of the 13th Guards Rifle Division, who crosses the Volga River on boat to fight the fascists. This beginning is very much inspired by the 2001 movie Enemy at the Gates. The boat crossing with German air attacks, the lacking supplies with only half the soldiers getting a rifle, and the protagonist having to make do with only a bullet clip. The absurd horde tactic of sending your men against machine gun fire, and the commissars in the back shooting deserters, or anyone who retreats really, on sight. The first and second missions play this out beat by beat. And it isn't really historical. The boat crossing is fine, but the Soviet army was not lacking in supplies at this stage of the war. There's no historical evidence that they were running out of rifles for their soldiers. The Mosin Nagant was pretty cheap. There's also no evidence for wide usage of horde tactics in the Eastern Front, and those Soviet officers did execute soldiers who ran from battle. This was not typically done in the middle of the battle, as the movie depicts, and they were much more likely to just intimidate the soldiers into marching back to the front lines. The Soviet army, or at least its leadership, is often shown by media to be incompetent and useless, and this is greatly exaggerated from reality just to make the Soviets look worse. This is also part of the historical erasure or minimization of the role of the Soviet people in defeating fascism, and it's a real shame that the game imported that from cinema. Not always lost though, the game also imported the absolute chaotic nature of Stalingrad, which is very correct. Lacking a gun, we find a sergeant who helps us make our way up the hill and then proceed into the Red Square. In this crazy dash through the bullets, I managed to grab a rifle, and accompanied by whatever comrades remain, we snipe German officers, retake Red Square, and move through the city towards a train station to find a Major Zubov. These missions are complete chaos, the city is in rubble and overrun entirely by the enemy, but you have your allies by your side, at least until they die. It is thematically and emotionally a very different experience from the other campaigns. They had similar events, with Martin taking Saint-Méry-Église and Evans taking Benneville, but those were small French towns which the protagonists had no real connection to. Stalingrad, though, is a major Soviet city. It even holds the name of the great leader. When you shoot your gun in Stalingrad, you're not just fighting for freedom or liberty or some arbitrary concept, not that those aren't worth fighting for, but you're fighting for your people, your occupied country. This is why I think the Soviet campaign is kind of epic. It has this brutality and rawness that goes beyond what you find in the other missions. The Battle of Stalingrad is hell. It's visceral, close quarters fighting for survival in a way that few of the fights on the Western Front really were. The Germans like calling it the Rattenkrieg, or the War of Rats, referring to its brutality. this is even more appropriate for the underground part of the battle. The next mission happens over a month later in November, with Voronin having been promoted to junior sergeant by Major Zubov. He's still in Stalingrad, but by now he's a trained sniper, and he treads through the sewers to reach an apartment building he was requested to occupy and defend. The Stalingrad sewers were a major battleground in real life, utilized both by the Soviets and the Germans, and the apartment we're heading toward is Pavlov's house. Pavlov's house was some random building in the middle of the city, which was raided by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and used as a strategic point in the conflict. The apartment was protected by a small group of soldiers for 2 months until they got reinforcements, and in this game we get to meet Sergeant Pavlov and be a part of his defense squad. This is one of the hardest missions in the game. The house is cramped, there's tanks outside, and there's Germans constantly invading the apartment. You'll also probably be out of ammo by this point. The PPSH is really good here, but it runs out, so you'll just be desperately scavenging German MP40 ammo. The best strategy generally is to find somewhere isolated and lie on the ground, waiting for the timer to run out and shooting anyone who shows up. It's not very heroic, but it does the trick. And when you do win, it feels really good, even if you just camped out the timer. The defense of Pavlov's house wasn't actually this simple in real life. The soldiers were only relieved on November 25, multiple weeks after this mission, but that obviously wouldn't have worked for gameplay purposes. Stalingrad in general was kind of butchered for gameplay purposes. It was a really long battle with no major central event like D-Day was for the Western Front. The city was only liberated in February 1943, months later, and whether or not our character participated in that is left in the air. I think the game's intent here was to paint us, Voronin, and our allies as courageous soldiers who fought fiercely in Stalingrad until it was freed, but obviously they wouldn't be able to depict every single fight we took part in, so they focused on 2 smaller events instead. Like in the previous campaigns, the next time we see Voronin, he's being reassigned to a different unit. Now a full sergeant, he works with the 150th Rifle Division during the invasion of Warsaw, Poland's occupied capital. This was part of the Vistula Oda offensive, which was a Red Army operation to push into Poland, expel the Nazis from the Oder River, and reach closer to Berlin. It was one of the last major Soviet offensives, and by the end of it, they had pretty much won the war. The events we see in the game are from January 17th, 1945, the precise day in which Warsaw was taken by the Soviets, so we take part in that too. And I really like this. Unlike Martin and Evans, who are taken out of the war for crazy Spec Ops shit, Voronin only dives further into it. Having saved Stalingrad from Nazi clutches, he marches forward with his fellow comrades all the way to Poland a year later, and takes Warsaw to boot. It's a near total flip in the chess game. Before, the Germans bombed Stalingrad to hell. Now, they run out of Poland with their tails behind their backs. These are real events, of course, the game didn't make them up, but playing through them makes them seem almost like a kind of epic story arc. This is obviously what the developers were going for. It's why they skipped from Stalingrad straight to Warsaw. We battle through German factories to disable them, explode a tank, and capture a rail yard to liberate the city. Now after this, Voronin is promoted to full sergeant and transferred again, this time to the 2nd Guards Tank Army, and we command the T-34 tank towards the Oder River. What? I know Voronin is an experienced officer, but would that allow him to command a tank crew? Anyways, this is the obligatory vehicle mission of this game. It's actually 2 vehicle missions, both taking place in January 26th at the end of the offensive. They see us blowing up tanks and artillery. I don't have much to say on them. Tank gameplay is pretty boring. Like, the tank battles were important in real life, naturally, but compared to taking Warsaw, it feels not as good. After this, the game moves into its final stage at the very end of World War II, but before that, I think we could use taking a detour. United Offensive was released in 2004, serving as an expansion to Call of Duty. It adds a few new features like running and new guns, but most importantly, it has an entirely new campaign, or 3 campaigns I guess I should say, which make it about as big as the original game, unbelievable for modern AAA titles, and they follow the same general structure as the base: American campaign, then British campaign, then Soviet campaign, but they serve to cover some of the blind spots that the original could not, because Call of Duty 1, wide-reaching as it is in its coverage of the war, it still has a limited scope. The American campaign only covers the airborne part of D-Day and then moves on to fictional missions. The British campaign is the same. The Soviet campaign touches on a little more, having one part in Stalingrad and another in Poland, but that's still missing a lot. And that's why I think United Offensive is almost an essential add-on for Call of Duty 1. It's a must-play if you're gonna play it, because it adds the Battle of the Bulge, the RAF bombing campaign, the Italian front, the Battle of Kursk, and the 4th Battle of Kharkov. All of these are really awesome inclusions, which aren't commonly covered in World War II games.
Alright, this is the last point on our patrol.
The Battle of the Bulge, or the Ardennes Offensive, was the last major German offensive on the Western Front from December 1944 to January 1945, happening in the frigid winters of the Forest of Ardennes, which extends into France, Germany, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Its primary goals were to capture the port of Antwerp in Belgium, crush the Western Allies, and stop them from advancing towards Germany. It was largely fought between Germany and the United States, though the US was supported by other Western powers, and eventually resulted in Allied victory. Much like in Stalingrad, after the Germans lost here, they could only ever retreat. In the game, we take control of a new character, Corporal Scott Riley. We're still working with the 506th, in fact we fight along Sergeant Moody and Captain Folly, though we never meet Martin, our previous protagonist. Maybe he retired after saving Major Ingram? So we start out in the Siege of Bastogne, a major battle in the war, specifically in the Bois Jacques forest, just outside the town of Foy. In real life, the 101 Airborne occupied this forest until they managed to move into Foy, which is what happens here. We get to run from a German advance in a vehicle segment, not a good start, but at least we've got a machine gun this time, and then we hold the line in a bunch of foxholes under German artillery fire, testing out the brand new 30 cal and the American bazooka. It's honestly more intense fighting than any of the previous American levels, a bit reminiscent of Stalingrad, so this expansion's already promising to take things up a notch. We then jump from late December to mid-January, just before the invasion of Foy. Along Sergeant Moody, we head out into the night, taking down German encampments, fighting off a bunker, and securing the crossroads that will be used in the morning. This is done in conjunction with 2 other squads, which works to give the impression that it's an actual coordinated military operation. Then in the morning, the invasion. Probably the hardest mission in this campaign. The start has you running through machine gun fire, and it's kind of luck-based whether you survive. The taking of the town is easier as you move from house to house. Those sniping panzer tracks from the destroyed church tower can be tough as people shoot back at you. And the last part is like really hard. You have to run across this fucking bridge, shoot your way through respawning enemies, and blow up a tank to end the mission. Jesus. The final mission, a few days later, sees us taking the nearby town of Noville with the help of tanks. It's more of the same in more cramped areas, with an epic final stand in a chateau against Nazis and panzers. This part had been done before in Call of Duty 1. Waiting for a timer to run out while surviving waves of enemies isn't anything new, but here it's done with a sense of awe that the original American campaign didn't quite reach. The music swells, tanks approach from all sides, and when all seems lost and struggles useless, an aerial bombardment relieves us of combat.
They love to make a dramatic entrance.
Any way they want, sir. Any way they want.
Very dramatic. Again, this was done before, at Pegasus Bridge, at Pavlov's house, but here it really hits a chord. Your battle through Bastogne is framed as a monumental struggle to beat back the occupiers, one in which you fight to your wits' end by your allies, until all seems lost. And then you survive, and you can live to feel like a hero. This greater understanding of the teams, the focus on the actual war rather than fiction, the greater variety and complexity of the levels, plus the fact that I just like winter levels in general, all contribute to me enjoying this campaign a lot more than the original American one. It's really cool and gem-packed, even with just 4 missions. The Ardennes offensive shows up in Banner Brothers as well, by the way. The British campaign for this time doesn't do things that differently, given its missions are still pretty unique. For starters, we're Sergeant James Doyle of the Royal Air Force, and we participate in a bombing raid over German-occupied Netherlands in 1941. This is early in the war, the earliest we've been, with France already conquered, but not long after the start of the Soviet invasion. A big thing in the confrontation between Germany and Britain was the air battles. You know, Germany couldn't invade England, and England couldn't liberate France, so they resorted to just bombing each other to bits. Luftwaffe against the RAF. It's a little explored part of World War II in video games, probably because it's hard to design levels around it, and I really respect this game for taking the risk. This mission is kind of on rails. We just move around the airship's different turrets, shooting down enemy planes, fix some damages on it, and release the bombs upon our targets, probably killing a lot of innocent civilians, which was very common in bombing raids for both sides. Gameplay wise, not all that, but it's different, and I don't think it hurts the experience. Our plane is struck down at the end of the mission, though we survive via parachute and end up stuck in a tree in the middle of nowhere in the Netherlands. We're then rescued by Major Ingram of the British SAS, the same guy who we saved in that prison camp in the American campaign, and work along with him and the Dutch resistance to get out of there alive. Couple noteworthy things. Ingram here obviously parallels the role of Price in the base game, serving as the main British badass that you follow. The Dutch resistance against the Nazis did exist and had ample popular support, being primarily organized by the Dutch Communist Party and other local organizations. Their first major protests actually began in 1941, and the British did collaborate with the Dutch by sending supplies, but their activities were very limited in scope before 1944. As was the case with most resistance movements in the war, it's very hard to believe that they would have been able to organize a paramilitary operation like the one we see in the game, and even more so that it would count with the presence of a British major. But you know, we're back in action movie logic, I guess. By the way, look at how weak this revolver is. All things considered, this mission's still cool. Ingram takes us along to clear out farmhouses and make our way towards a bridge, which we rig to explode just as the supply trains moves across. The rest of the mission is a mad dash back to the barn we'd secured, and then an epic escape on truck. No historical parallels, but narratively, it serves as Doyle's founding experience on the ground. It's kind of crazy that he'd be able to pull all this off without any previous experience, right? Well, he leaves the Netherlands alive and later joins the SAS to do more stuff with Ingram in the future, this being a raid on Sicily. Operation Husky, starting with the Allied invasion of Sicily on July 9th, 1943, is what kickstarted the liberation of fascist Italy. Less than 2 months later, the Italian government would capitulate, though Mussolini would be rescued by the Nazis and they would form a puppet government in the north of the country. It was another one of those tide-turning moments of the conflicts. Unfortunately, we do not take part in the invasion itself. We're sent ahead of it to Sicily in order to sabotage coastal batteries. The game says this happens in July 12, which is probably a mistake because that's after the start of the invasion. It's more Spec Ops schlock, though this might be the very best of it in Call of Duty 1. The setting is new, we get a silenced stand for some reason. It doesn't work, it's impossible to stealth this mission. We blow up a lighthouse as a distraction and then infiltrate the local base to find those artillery guns. It's really cool level design and all. I do have to complain though that all the soldiers are Germans, which doesn't make sense. We're in Sicily, we'd be fighting mostly Italians here. I think there's two main explanations for this. Maybe the developers were icky on including Italians as villains because they're harder to villainize and dehumanize than the Nazis, even if they're still, you know, fascists. But more likely, I think, is that they didn't have the resources. Including Italian soldiers would have taken new voice lines, new models, new guns, so we're stuck with only Germans because of it. But yeah, cool mission. It is comparably absurd to Etterdam and Battleship Tidbits, not as much because you're not alone, but it's insane that like less than 10 dudes took on this whole base. I mean, might as well have called off the invasion. There's no one else in this base, as far as we know. But I like playing through this, so I'll give it a pass. Like the Etterdam, we make our escape via vehicle, but this time we're on a motorcycle with Ingram. Our allies are on a truck that unfortunately gets obliterated. Next mission has a rather unique vehicle getaway sequence through an Italian town, and then on foot towards a patrol boat. Another vehicle sequence here, similarly easy. And as we watch the artillery ammo we rigged blow the fuck up, we get the hell out of there. This expansion got really good at making cinematic moments like this. In comparison, the original British campaign ended with us just getting on a boat.
We lost the captain. Damn.
So anyways, Soviet campaign now. Battle of Kursk.
At the
comrades. Defeat your fear. The enemy will be easy.
The Battle of Kursk started out as a German offensive in July 1943, around the time of the invasion of Italy. Its goal was to push back the Soviets after they'd won in Stalingrad. It was mostly a tank battle, the largest tank battle in history, and it ended up proving to the Germans that the Soviets were far better prepared than they had estimated. In the game, Kursk serves to bridge the empty space in Voronezh's campaign. We've seen Stalingrad, we've seen Warsaw, now we see Kursk, which happened in between. Our protagonist is not Voronezh, but Private Yuri Petrenko, freshly joining the Patriotic War with the 67th Guards Rifle Division. Petrenko's missions see much of the same chaos of Stalingrad that I love, but now in rainy summer in a mix of urban and rural with much more moving around. The beginning evokes the Volga River crossing with planes bombarding our trucks and commissars threatening us, but I think the depiction is more respectful here with plenty of ammunition waiting for us in the trenches and no repeat of the whole shooting your allies thing. Also, we get the brand new SVT-40, which I love. This mission is similar to the first one in the Ardennes, with us defending our perimeter from a German invasion, then blowing up tanks, but the last part sees us taking a village and holding it until our reinforcements arrive. We then move on to take the town of Ponieri, which was historically under German siege at this time. It's a really nice level too, with plenty of cool encounters. Ponieri is very distinct from your average town in Normandy or Belgium, but it's also nothing like the ruined metropolis that was Stalingrad, nor the winter-struck Warsaw. It's something new, and it makes me regret how unpopular the setting is. The Battle of Kursk is pretty much unexplored in World War II shooters, other than this one. We end the level conquering a factory and blowing up a tank, vaguely reminiscent of Warsaw. The next level is a tank level. I don't want to talk about it. It happened shortly after, still in Kursk, and I think the developers wanted to use it to bridge Kursk with the following missions of the campaign, but it's not very fun. It's visually different from the previous tank levels, which were in winter, but the gameplay is the same. I guess it might have been weird if they hadn't included a tank mission in Kursk, of all places, where the tanks played a central role, but I mean, come on, we can forgive a little omission. I just don't want to play the tank level, stop. A month later in August, Petrenko has been moved from the 5th Guards Tank Army Division to the 15th Guards Rifle Division to take part in the Belgorod-Kharkov offensive, specifically the 4th Battle of Kharkov. This was a Soviet operation to destroy Nazi cavalry and take the cities of Belgorod and Kharkov, which they lost in 1941. So it's kind of like a direct sequel or response to Kursk after the Germans lost that, and it makes a lot of sense to include it here as a closing to this chapter of the Soviet Union. The next major thing in the Eastern Front would be the retaking of Belarus around the time of D-Day, though that wasn't covered. And the next after that would be the liberation of Poland, which we've already seen. And I think it works like this. We've seen the Soviets in 42, then in 45, and though we're missing 44, what we get to see from them in 43 is an epic conclusion, nevertheless. Petrenko fights in Kharkov, a city destroyed that echoes Stalingrad, though I find it to be much prettier and higher fidelity than Stalingrad. This is the thing with the whole of United Offensive actually. I think it has really good visual design. These levels feel amazing to immerse yourself in, more so than those of the base game. This part lets us use binoculars, which is a weird mechanic that will return in later games, but in this game it's pretty useless. You just get to call artillery fire with them, but it helps us move into downtown Kharkov with our cavalry. This mission is hard, and I mean brutal. United Offensive in general is tough, certainly a step up from Call of Duty 1. Again, I was playing on hard and not veteran, but by this point in the game it didn't seem to make a difference. Enemies would snap to where I popped up so fast, and there were so many of them everywhere, and they always focused on me, and having allies did not seem to help. The square section with the Lenin statue is especially chaotic, but the very worst is at the end. This train station part is hell on earth. Seriously, you're in an open area with lots of guys shooting at you, some from up on buildings you can barely see, so it's really easy to get shot. Not to mention, until the very end of the mission, this place is getting constantly bombed by German planes in random patterns that are hard to predict or prepare for. You're gonna die a lot here, but you can't really hide. You have to stay close to this flak gun so you can use it to shoot down tanks. That's a mandatory objective. You can also use the Panzerfausts that are scattered around the arena, or this other gun, but those options are even harder. Taking down these tanks and avoiding getting shot or blown up is awfully difficult. You don't even see what killed you, mostly. And after that, you still have to survive for 2 full minutes while you wait for reinforcements. I beat this mission on Veteran once, many years ago. I have no idea how. This time I figured out a strategy, which I think was similar to my last one. Mostly involved sniping down Germans before I moved to the flak gun, and I'm praying that no one shot me on the way there and on the way back, and then hiding beneath the trains and just shooting whoever got near. It worked, but I still had to use medikits. On Veteran, that would not be a luxury. So yeah, probably the hardest mission in the Call of Duty franchise. Unironically, bar none. It feels damn good to hear the ally train coming in when that timer runs out. There's no big finale like what the base game has. I'm getting there. Though, for Kharkov, it's big enough. That's how United Offensive ends, in fact. Straight to the credits. I think the overall quality of United Offensive is higher than that of Call of Duty 1. It masterfully covers very underutilized areas of World War II, with better level design, better visual design, and a better understanding of the themes of collective bravery. This can be seen in the many of the huge fights we take part in, which were the poster boys for the main game, but are far more present here. The James Bond action this time is restricted only to the British campaign, appropriately so I guess, and even then I think it's done in more interesting ways. Working with the Dutch resistance and preparing for Husky are far more believable scenarios than invading a dam and a battleship effectively on your own. More fun to play, too, along those NPCs. Grey Matter Studios, which are the people who handle this, really outdid Infinity Ward, which is why they'd go on to work on other games in the series in the near future. In nearly every way, I think, United Offensive is better than Call of Duty 1. It's the better game, and it better delivers on the original proposal they put all over the advertisements. But then, here's the catch. It does not replace Call of Duty 1. Rather, it adds on to it. United Offensive isn't just more game content, it doesn't just add to the gameplay, it adds to the narrative of World War II that Call of Duty builds for itself. Think of how much the war we've seen to this point. The British bombing campaign, the Dutch resistance, Camp Toccoa, Stalingrad, Sicily, Kursk, Kharkov, D-Day, the British D-Day, the Ardennes, and the Oder Offensive. Call of Duty 1, especially when you consider United Offensive, is not a game set in World War II, it's a game about World War II. There are plenty of blind spots that aren't covered by the game, Africa, the Pacific Theater, some other stuff, but all in all, we have experienced a majority of the European fronts of the war, a very wide coverage. This is very unlike most war movies that would focus on one specific team, maybe one specific character who take part in one specific area of the war. Call of Duty 1 doesn't do that. It takes us all across the continent as many different soldiers in many different units with many different allies. And this is a big part of its theme. Not only do we fight along dozens, hundreds of other combatants along these missions, which was a huge part of the marketing as I've discussed, we also fight in multiple places, in multiple time frames. Call of Duty 1 takes World War II and turns it into this epic story with many different characters and no singular protagonist. And I think that's one of the most awesome, honest ways to depict this war. It's not the only one. World War II was heroic, but also terrifying, and many stories and movies focus on those terrifying aspects, on the horrors of war, on genocide, on the civilian casualties, on melancholy. But as I discussed in the beginning of this video, that doesn't translate quite well for a game where you're supposed to have fun. Call of Duty chose to focus on heroism, yet unlike other games of its time, it went a step further and collectivized it. The heroes in this game aren't specific soldiers, they're teams, platoons, battalions. More accurately, they're the people, all the people on both fronts. The young recruits who fought to stop the evils of fascism, not as individuals, but as a humanized collective. The fact that Call of Duty and its expansion are a video game rather than a movie gave them leeway to explore so much of this conflict, and it contributed immensely to what they were going for. Because it's impossible to paint a completely honest depiction of World War II if you don't explore all the fronts, all the battles, all the fights. And Call of Duty doesn't do that. It's impossible for anything to do that. There's too much stuff, but it got damn close. The result is incredible. There are plenty of faults. The base American campaign and both British campaigns get a bit lost in themselves, and actually Call of Duty is still an old game, the first one in the series, so as a game it doesn't necessarily stand up to the mechanical design of future titles. I think United Offensive really does though. I love playing it, even if you disregard all this narrative nonsense I'm spouting. I think it's one of the most fun Call of Duty experiences ever made. So that's my main thesis, I think. Call of Duty 1 manages to make an engaging story of collective heroics out of one of the bloodiest conflicts of mankind. Not in part, but in its entirety. And it pulls it off, partly because this is one of the only wars in history with which you could pull it off, but also because it's a damn good game made with real soul behind it. It even has an amazing conclusion. There's something I've neglected to mention until now. The intermissions. Many times in Call of Duty 1 and United Offensive, you'll get those slideshows or documentaries that show you what's going on historically. But you also frequently get journals or documents which you can read in the loading screens. In later entries, these would be replaced by proper voiced cutscenes, often happening between characters of the game. But here, these are mostly written or read by your characters. They're the only evidence of their personalities, in fact. Martin gets a proper journal where he lays down his personal thoughts. Evans gets printed documents about his missions, which he sometimes writes over. Voronin doesn't actually write stuff himself, he just gets documents from his superiors. Riley also gets printed mission plans, though they look different. Doyle starts out with little journal snippets, but after he moves to the SAS, it's mission plans. And finally, Petrenko writes letters to his sweetheart back home. Every loading screen is customized too, with unique visuals for each character. It's a really cool addition, which makes your characters and their struggles, and by extension the struggles of their partners, seem more real. And it really pays off in the base campaign when you cycle back to Martin's journals and you can immediately tell you've shifted perspectives. So let's get back to the base game. After the tank missions with Voronin, we get thrown into a final battery of missions, each with one of the protagonists we've played thus far. Private Martin participates in the Battle of Recogn in Belgium, just a few hours after Nouville is taken actually. A documentary gives us a brief overview of the war situation, with the Germans losing territory to the Soviets and to the Battle of the Bulge, and then we jump into the winter. This mission feels pretty weak in comparison to the expansion campaign. It's a much briefer exploration of the Ardennes. By the way, isn't it weird that our character is still a private? Like, he's been fighting since June of 44, as a special agent in some cases. How was he not promoted? And why is Captain Folly here? Wasn't he in Nouville a few hours ago? Couldn't he catch a fucking break? The level's as simple as raiding 2 bunkers in the snow and getting some documents. Rather underwhelming. We're back with Sergeant Evans for the next one, now deep in Germany proper, in another fictional SAS covered up. Apparently those documents that Martin stole contained the location of a V2 rocket site, so it's Evans' role to destroy them, half a month later. This mission is cooler, though it's visually indistinguishable from the last one. Has plenty of sniper action in open fields, it's actually pretty difficult to avoid getting shot. The last section especially makes it one of the harder missions in COD 1. Invading these bunkers is very tough, there's enemies coming from every side, but we fuel those rockets thrown at the bunkers and then make them explode with our bombs. Then we're out of there. It's nice that they managed to include the V2 rockets. They were pretty important in the later part of the war. Most of them were sent to bomb Britain, so it's fitting that it was the British guy who raided the site. I also like that they established a direct connection between the American mission and the British mission this time, with the whole documents thing. Unfortunately, there's no such connection with the Soviet mission that's coming up, but I think, by itself, it serves as quite enough of a closer. Sergeant Voronin, having marched all the way from Stalingrad, reaches Berlin. The Battle of Berlin was the Soviet conquest of the German capital, which effectively ended World War II on the Western Front. It is, therefore, an extremely appropriate point for us to end the game on. It's not the best level in the game, not by a long shot. I don't think it looks too good. The low poly ruined buildings are very reminiscent of Stalingrad. It's really hard to tell them apart. But once we reach the Reichstag, the old German parliament, everything slides into place. With the help of tanks and soldiers, we storm the building, get up to the roof, and overlooking a destroyed city, we raise the Soviet flag. This scene replicates the very famous photo of a Soviet flag being raised over the Reichstag, though that one was obviously staged. Along with the music and the following cutscene, it brings our story to a close. An admittedly simple story of good versus evil, but one that avoids the pitfalls of dumb nationalism by constructing a multifaceted depiction of the war, one that includes the struggles and sacrifices of all the different armies. The last cutscene tells the story of a Soviet soldier meeting an American one. They don't understand each other, but they feel the same sort of joy at having finished these endless years of bloody fighting. I said it before, I don't think Call of Duty 1 is perfect, nor its narrative. It's incomplete, too. It doesn't cover the Holocaust, or the civilian struggle, or the Pacific Theater, etc. And it does treat the war with extreme glorification, which glosses over its undeniable brutality. But it does what it wants to do uniquely well. It's a really honest story of soldier heroism, a validation and commemoration of foregone lives, and this is expertly tied to the gameplay. Of course, a big reason my opinion is so positive is United Offensive. I think United Offensive is uniquely brilliant and it weighs tremendously on the quality of this product. But still, with United Offensive included, maybe even without it, I think Call of Duty 1 is the best depiction of World War II the series has ever had. It's almost lightning in a bottle, as cliche as that sounds. I legitimately think this campaign has something that none of the future ones could ever replicate. The credits of United Offensive give out special thanks to the men and women who died for our freedom. A lot of the Call of Duty games do variations of this, and I don't think it's always appropriate, but here, it very much is. Thanks for watching. As always, my coffee is in the description if you want to contribute. I really appreciate it. I think I'll be back to Castlevania next time. Maybe I'll do more Call of Duty eventually. No promises. Bye.